It was the last cold afternoon of March, and I was carrying my own dresses down the narrow stair with both arms full, 3 and 4 at a time, so I would not have to climb back up more often than I had to. I was 24 years old, 3 years married, and the baby was a month off, maybe less, and I had to turn myself sideways at the landing because I did not fit the way I used to fit. Below me in the kitchen, the men were bringing a bed frame up in pieces, and my husband's voice was kind the whole time, telling them to mind the door frame, telling his mother that the room got good light in the morning and that she would like it once her chest was set under the window. Nobody was cruel that day. That is the part I have never known how to say to anyone who was not standing on that stair with me. The room was given, and the bed was moved, and the quilt chest went up behind it, and in all that long afternoon, with 8 people in my house and my own clothes in my arms, not one soul thought to ask me where I would sleep. Amos and I were married on a Thursday in November at my parents' place, with the benches hauled in from 3 farms and the celery on the table the way it is done, and afterward we went to live in his grandfather's house on the far side of the ridge, in the same Jimé where he was born. It was a good house. I want that said plain, because it was, with a deep cellar and a stove that drew well and a south window over the sink where the light came in all winter. I kept that house from the first morning. I scrubbed the floors and blacked the stove and put up the peaches and the corn and the chow-chow, and I learned which board in the pantry gave under a person's weight, and I knew the sound of every door in it the way you know voices. But it was never mine, and I understood that early, though I would not have used those words then. The sideboard in the front room had been his grandmother's, and when I moved it 8 inches to make room for a chair, his mother straightened it back on my next church Sunday, gently, without a word said about it. The dishes were her dishes from when she was young. The ordnung of our district is plain about a great many things, but not about that, and nobody ever needed a rule for it anyway, because it was simply understood. A wife keeps a house. She does not own the house she keeps. I had finished my schooling at the end of 8th grade like everybody, and I had been taught to make bread and to cut a dress pattern and to hold my tongue in front of company, and I had been taught, without one person ever saying it out loud, that the rooms I cleaned belonged to the family, and that I was the newest part of the family, and that new things go where there is room for them. I did not have a word for it yet. Amos's father, Eli, died in February, 4 days after Valentine's, of a heart that had been failing him quietly since Christmas. There was no doctor to speak of, and no insurance to send him to one, and he did not want it in any case, and he went in his own bed with his boots dried by the stove. Barbara came to us in March. She was 63, she had buried a husband and 2 babies before me, and she came with a trunk and a rocking chair and a face that had gone very still. I would not have wanted her anywhere else. I want that understood, too. What happened after that happened so slowly that I could never point at a day and say, "There, that was the day." She moved the flour tin to the left of the stove, where her own mother had kept it. She salted the potatoes at the pot instead of at the table. She began to answer for me. When the women asked at Jimé how I was carrying, she would say the baby sat high and I was doing fine, and I would stand there beside her nodding, and it was true, and it was not mine to say any more. The neighbor women brought their pies to her hand. The bishop's wife sat with her in my kitchen, and I poured the coffee. And my name got said less at my own table. Amos would come in from the barn and ask, "Is supper on?" and Barbara would answer him, not to push me out. She had kept a kitchen for 40 years, and her hands did not know how to sit still in a room with a stove in it, and grief will make a person work. But by the end of that month, I could stand in the middle of my own floor at 4 in the afternoon with nothing needing me, no bowl, no child yet, no question, and feel like a girl visiting somewhere. My cap strings on my shoulders and my hands empty in a house I had scrubbed on my knees for 3 years. I did not have a word for it yet. The back room off the kitchen faces north, and there is no stovepipe through it. It is where the boots go, and the cream separator went in the old days, and the wash bench still stands along the wall under a window that has never shut square since before I came. Amos carried the cot down that same afternoon and made it up himself, and he did it kindly, and he said the kitchen wall would hold the heat some, and he was not lying to me, it did hold some. He said his mother should not be climbing stairs at her age, and that was true. He said we would sort it out after the baby, and he meant it. My husband has never in his life said a hard word to me. That is not what this is. But I lay down that night 8 months along, on a cot in a boot room, and I could see my breath in the light that came under the kitchen door, and I put my hand on the top of my belly where she was pushing out at me, and something in me came up out of the floor and would not go back down. It was not anger yet. It was the feeling of standing in a room and understanding that the room had already been decided about, and that the deciding had gone all the way around the table and back again, without ever once stopping at me. If you are listening to me now with your own hands busy, with the water running or the wash to fold, and you know exactly what that feels like, I would be glad if you stayed with me a while. Subscribe, so the next one of these finds you, and tell me down in the comments where you were sitting the first time you understood that nobody was going to ask you. I read them all. It has been a comfort to me, more than I expected, to find out how many of us there are. I lay in the cold, and I turned it over, and I could not name it. It was not a sin done to me. It was not anything the bishop would have known what to do with. I did not have a word for it yet. The next Tuesday was warmer, and I told Barbara I was taking chow chow across to Ruth Stoltzfus, which was true, and I took a jar off my own cellar shelf and went out the back door with my coat not buttoning over me anymore. Ruth is the oldest widow in our GMA. She is 81, and she lives in the Dowdy house behind her son Moses' place, and the field between us was plowed and thawing, so I walked the fence line instead, slow, stopping twice, with the wind pulling at my cap and the mud taking my shoes. It is a 1/4 mile. It took me most of half an hour. I had no plan for what I would say when I got there. I only knew that I could not sit one more evening at that table hearing my own house talked about over my head, and that if I said any of it to Amos he would be sorry, and being sorry would end it, and it would not be fixed, it would only be ended. She had the door open before I was up the steps, because she had watched me the whole way across, the way old women do. She sat me in the good chair by her stove and she put the coffee on, and she did not ask me one question. She let me have the warm and the quiet for a while. Her kitchen is very small and very orderly, and everything in it is within her reach from the one chair. And then I told her. I told it in Dutch, which is the only way it would come, and I did not tell it well. I told her about the stair, and the bed frame in pieces, and the flour tin moved to the left of the stove, and the pies going to Barbara's hand, and the wash bench, and the window that will not shut, and how nobody had been unkind, not one person, not once, and how that was somehow the worst of it, and how I could not say what was wrong because nothing was wrong, and how I had gone and gotten myself so ungrateful that I could not look at my husband's mother in her first spring of widowhood without something bitter turning in me. Ruth listened to the end of it. Then she set her cup down on the arm of her chair, and she looked at me for a long moment, and she said, "In 1971, when Amos's grandfather was still bishop, I was moved into a back room off my own kitchen." She said it plain, the way you would say the price of feed. Her mother-in-law had come to them the year the barn burned, and Ruth had been 26, with 2 little ones, and 1 coming, and her husband had been a good man, and had carried her things down himself and made up the bed and said they would sort it out after. She said she slept in that room 11 years. She said she had never once been asked, and she had never once said, and by the time the room came back to her, she no longer wanted it, because she had gotten small enough to fit where she had been put. And then she leaned toward me, and she said the thing I have carried every day since. She said, "Child, everybody asked where your husband's mother would sleep. The bishop asked." Your husband asked. The whole Gmae asked, and they were right to ask, and they answered it well. And who, child, ever asked you where you belonged? I sat in that little kitchen, and I could not answer her. Nobody had. Not once, not in 3 years, not on the day I came into that house as a bride, not on the day the bed went up the stair. And here is the piece of it that I did not want and could not put down. I had never asked either. Not out loud, not of Amos, not of Barbara, not of myself. I had let the house decide, and the house, without malice, without one cruel person anywhere in it, had quietly decided that my place was whatever was left over when everyone else was settled. My daughter came 9 days later, in that back room, because there was no time to move me anywhere. The midwife came at 2 in the morning with her lamp, and Barbara stuffed the bad window with a folded towel and held my hand and prayed over me in Dutch. And she was as good to me that night as my own mother would have been. And in the middle of it, in the coldest room in my house, with my husband's mother's hand in mine, I understood that both of those things were true at once, and that neither one canceled the other out. I did not have a word for it then. I have a word for it now. It is place. Every wife in that district has a house and a husband and work enough for 4 women, and some of us have no place, and nobody meant to take it, and it is gone all the same. I did not make a speech. There was never going to be a speech. What I did was this. 10 days after Lydia was born, at supper, I set my hand on the back of the chair at the south end of the table, where I could see the window and reach the stove, and I said, out loud, in front of both of them, "This is where I sit." And then I said, "The cradle goes in the front room by the stove, not in the back, because she is not going to sleep cold." My voice came out very small. My hands were shaking on the chair back. Amos looked up at me, and I watched my husband, who had never in his life meant me 1 hour of harm, understand for the first time in 3 years that there had been a question and that nobody had put it to me. He did not argue. He got up and moved the cradle himself, right then, with his supper going cold. He asks me now. That is the whole of what changed, and it is not small. Where should this go, Sadie? Which room should Mem have when your sister comes to stay? Do you want the sideboard where it is? He forgets sometimes, and I remind him, and reminding him is not a fight anymore. It is just the shape our marriage has now. And I asked Barbara too, because Ruth's question had a second edge to it that took me longer to feel. I asked her where she would like to sit, and where she would like her rocker, and whether she wanted the flour tin left or right, and she looked at me for a good while before she answered, and then she said, "Left," and her chin went, just once. 63 years old and buried a husband, and I do not believe anybody had asked her that since she was a girl. We are all 3 of us still in that house. The back room holds Boots again, and the woman who took my room is the woman who sat up with me the night my daughter came, and I will not have a word said against her in my kitchen. I want to say this to the women listening who are further down the road than I am. To the ones who are 65 and 70 and 80, sitting somewhere with the television on low, who kept a house for 40 years and cannot now say which chair at that table was yours. You were never furniture. You were never the thing that gets carried to the leftover corner when somebody with a greater need comes through the door. The Lord who made you did not make you a spare chair to be set out of the way, and I do not believe he ever asked that of you, whatever you were told by people who loved you and did not know what they were doing. And if there is a young woman in your family right now, a daughter or a granddaughter or a girl your son married last fall, and you can see the room being decided about over her head, you can ask her. That is all it takes. It takes one person in the house saying her name and asking her where she belongs, and I promise you she will remember it for the rest of her life, the way I remember an old woman setting down a coffee cup. And I want to say one thing very plainly, because some of you listening are not plain people, and I would not have you hear this story wrong. There is no villain in it. My husband is a good man, and he was a good man all through that cold spring. and he has never once in his life raised his hand or his voice to me. His mother is a good woman. Our bishop is a good man. My community fed me when I could not stand at the stove, and sat up with me in the night, and buried my husband's father with a tenderness that no amount of money buys anywhere in this world, and I hold my people and our faith in the highest dignity I know how to give. I would not trade this life for another one. What went wrong under my roof was not wickedness, and it was not the Amish way. It was a question nobody thought to ask, and that same question goes unasked at English tables and plain tables alike. And be gentle with the mother-in-law in the story. She was moved once too. So was hers. That is how it keeps going, not by cruelty, but by everybody being kind to the person in front of them, and nobody thinking to turn around. I wrote it all down, afterward. The stair, and the cold window, and Ruth's kitchen, and the things I have never been able to say out loud at GMA, the fuller story, and what came the year after, in a little book I called A Quiet and Faithful Home. Thank you for sitting with me. Take care of your hands, and find your chair, and say so out loud. If you would like to read the rest of it, the link to the book is in the description below and in the first pinned comment, and I would be glad to have you there.